a man opened the takeout he'd ordered and was completely surprised. He'd only paid $1 but received a full, delicious lunch spread. He happily ate every last bite. The delivery person returned the empty containers to their owner. The woman who received the empty box smiled with satisfaction. She assumed her husband had finished all the food she'd made, but she had no idea that her carefully prepared lunch had been eaten by a complete stranger. That evening, she dressed up and waited for her husband to come home. When her husband walked in, he didn't even look at her. Disappointed, she asked him if the food tasted good. He said the cauliflower at lunch was a bit too salty. She immediately understood. The lunch had been delivered to the wrong person. Meanwhile, Robert came home to his simple dinner. He couldn't help thinking about that delicious lunch he'd had. The next day at noon, he eagerly opened the lunchbox. His boring life finally had something to look forward to. Today's lunch was just as impressive. But strangely, there was a note inside the box. The note said she knew the lunch had been delivered to the wrong address. But she was happy that someone had finished all the food she'd made. As a thank you, she'd made a few extra dishes today. Robert hadn't expected this was all a mistake. He felt a bit disappointed. That evening, the empty containers came back with his reply. The woman opened the note. Today's dishes were a bit spicy, but he didn't have time to go home for lunch. He couldn't afford expensive takeout either. Being able to eat such a wonderful meal today, he felt incredibly lucky. He said this connection should probably end here. But the next day at noon, he received another lunchbox. His sincerity had touched Mary, and she wrote back a long letter. And so, through a lunchbox, they began a special correspondence. Robert was an employee nearing retirement, living the same monotonous life every day. Mary's presence brought color to his world. Mary also came to see Robert as someone she could confide in. She'd gotten married full of hope, never expecting her husband to grow colder toward her. She'd even smelled another woman's perfume when doing her husband's laundry. She said a loveless marriage was like living in a tomb. She wanted to leave and start over in a place called Bhutan. That evening, she received Robert's reply. Robert asked if he could go with her. Mary's heart raced. She wrote back saying they'd never even met, familiar yet strangers. But she didn't directly refuse. Robert was thrilled and quickly wrote to introduce himself, asking if they could meet. The next day, Mary replied that she was willing to meet. Robert was overjoyed, feeling like he'd rediscovered the passion of his youth. But as he prepared to leave, he looked at himself in the mirror. He realized he'd gotten so old. He went to the agreed-upon meeting place but couldn't bring himself to approach Mary. He just sat at a distance, watching her. Mary waited at the designated spot for a long time, but Robert never showed up. She was deeply disappointed, feeling her hopes crushed. The next day at noon, Robert received an empty lunchbox with no food inside. This was Mary's way of expressing her displeasure. That evening, Mary received Robert's letter. He said he'd been so excited that morning, shaving and getting ready to meet her. But when he looked in the mirror, he realized how old he was. Seeing how young and beautiful Mary was, he didn't want to hold her back in life. Mary didn't write back and stopped sending lunchboxes. The two lost contact just like that.